I've got here another labelled ale, Mountain Goat. So we're going from Adelaide to Melbourne.
Mountain Goat, yeah. Mountain Goat is a just racked up there about their 15th year in the industry, and are really only just starting to hit their straps. Now this one is actually an Australian craft beer, which is recreating a style of an English amber ale. And you can see the amber colour of the beer, quite dark.
Yep.
Not quite as dark as Tui's Old or more stout, but probably up there, a little bit darker than, say, Resch's in Sydney. And it's very much a malt-driven product.
Yep.
Now, the flavours that are in beer are threefold, or more than that, but you know, the major flavours that are in beer are from malt, so you get the biscuity, sweet, toffee notes from malt. Hops, you get the bitterness, of course, but also you can get different aromas from the hops based on which particular variety you use. And in fact, you know, hops are a bit like grape varieties, for example.
Yep.
If you use a different variety, like there's even a Sauvignon Blanc style beer actually that uses a hop called Nelson Sauvin, and that's Knapstein.
Yep.
Which if you're in your bottle shop, try some Knapstein. It's a very nice beer. But this beer is actually more in the toffee, which comes from the use of what they call specialty malts. Yep. Which are darker. They've been drum roasted as opposed to just normal kiln roasted. So the malts are much darker and almost on the verge of catching fire when they're made. So it's a bit like roasting coffee.
Yeah,
it's a similar sort of thing.
You mentioned Bohemia and Bavaria when it came to lagers. I've got a German lager here. I'm not quite sure how fresh it is.
Henninger is a brewery in Frankfurt, and you can see the actual building in the front on the label is actually their town hall, but it's an original German import, and you know, like most German beers, it's probably about 4.8% alcohol. Much lighter in colour, you can see. No, not much lighter than the Coopers, but very clear. Obviously been filtered quite finely. Yeah, it's a bit stale, but you know, beer is like bread; it will go stale over time. But it's nice. I mean, and you know, the predominant flavour in there is not like it is in the Coopers, the fruitiness from the high temperature fermentation. This would be a low temperature fermentation, and the predominant flavours in there is a sort of spine of sweet pale malt, but there's also quite a pronounced like herbal, grassy note from the actual hop that's used, which is usually in these German beers called Hersbruck or Hallertau, which are areas where hops are grown in Bavaria.
So when did we start getting lagers here?
Well, that's very interesting because, as I explained before, you know, I mean, like Victoria Bitter Ale was an ale until probably around about the 1920s. So they started. The first lagers, of course, in Australia were there was one brewed in Bendigo by Cohen Brothers, and then the first celebrated lager to be produced was, of course, Foster's, which was 1888, when two American brothers came over and imported a brewery from Germany and also a brewer from Germany, and went broke. they actually introduced a hell of a lot of like technological innovation at the time. That was probably why they went broke. But they actually delivered ice with the beer, so you could consume the beer cold, and that was a huge breakthrough. But there was a sort of a backlash against it, you know, good old ale and true, you see, was the British bulldog, you know, we don't want this German muck, you know. So they actually went away from lager, And of course, Carlton United Breweries, there was a merger of 6 breweries in 1907, and that was Foster's, Shamrock, Vic, Victoria Brewery, Carlton, McCracken's, and Castlemaine, of course, which was the original national brewery, as you've often pointed out to me, David. And of course, Forex was in the same boat. They would have changed from an ale, and you know more about this than perhaps I do.
Just briefly on that, there was the transition from in the 1920s when they got a German brewer in there, and they described it as technologically improving the place. But essentially, it was just changing over from Forex sparkling ale to Forex bitter ale. But it was a major transition from ales to lager, and they brought in a German brewer, Wilhelm Leitner, at Forex to do that transition.
Colloquially known as Bill, I believe.
Bill Leitner, yes, and I understand he had what was called a brewer's death.
He fell into the vat, did he?
No,
he out 3 times.
I think it was a late shift, and he fell down the steps.
Oh, okay. There's a guy in Wynkoop in America who did that actually quite relatively recently. Yeah. But the other interesting thing about the changeover from ale to lager was, of course, in Sydney, because in Sydney, as you know, you have the 2 terms new and old.
Yes.
Now, people get the reason for that totally mixed up. They think the old is like older than the new in terms of being stored for longer, but in fact the opposite is the case. The new is the lager,
right,
and it's stored for longer, but because it's lagered, it's stored for longer. But the new was the new style of beer in the 1920s, and actually what in fact happened was they changed over, you know, from ale to lager in the 1920s, and they kept the ale going, and they called that old.
Yep.
And the new became the new style of beer.
Well, thank you for that. And at the moment, Australia's beer drinkers are consuming what, about 98% lagers?
Oh, yeah, I guess. Yeah, I think worldwide it'd be more than 95%. Yeah, lager is predominantly. The reason being, I mean, lager is easier to drink than ale by and large, and for the climate, you know, hot climate, the refreshment of lager, because it's designed to be drunk cold. Ales are better consumed warm, actually, because it, just like red wines are compared to white wines, because it allows the fruity flavours to come out.
Yeah.
Whereas the lagers are usually more highly carbonated as well, so they need a colder temperature to keep them a bit under control. You know, particularly like if you look at the English real ale scenario, I think you mentioned Camera at some stage, but like the English real ales are totally different, again in style, because they're fairly well flat.
Yeah.
And that means flat, lacking gas. Whereas Cooper's, for example, is quite heady because it's actually fermented in the bottle. So,
well, look, thank you for that backdrop to both ale and lagers. It's been very informative, and indeed it's a very good segue to our next podcast, which I'll alert those who are watching to, where we'll discuss the future of the Australian beer industry. Thanks for your help.
Thanks, David.